Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Nerdy Multiverse and yet another breakdown. Today we will be breaking down and giving our initial thoughts on the third episode of the newest spin-off Walking Dead series following Daryl Dixon in France, The Walking Dead, Daryl Dixon. And the title of this episode in English translates to Paris Will Always Be Paris. And this episode starts off with Daryl and Isabelle making a stop on their way into Paris to meet with a man who supposedly has access to a radio. The two head inside of an old theater building while Laurent and Sylvie stay outside and watch over their wagon. Daryl and Isabelle meet the musician man inside and he takes him to his radio, which is ruined as all of the cords and wires have been cut. So there is no use for it now, and this man starts to get a little creepy, wondering if they would like to see a show. Leading them into the theater room itself, where he has an entire orchestra playing that is run by, well, walkers. Super eerie and strange. Anyways though, Daryl says that this was all a stupid detour and they end up leaving as the orchestra continues. Obviously the blasting music from inside of the building is going to eventually attract walkers outside as well, and Daryl and Isabelle get outside just in time to save Sylvie and Laurent from some walkers, as a smaller horde closes in on the building as they ride off headed to Paris. Finally, as they make their way into Paris, they stop and overlook the city and get to see the Eiffel Tower. They also actually pass the Pantheon building, and something that I also noticed here is that they are making their way into a massive city, and yet there are only a few walkers in sight. Such a small amount, in fact, that they just ignore them and keep moving. I think that this shows how well Paris handled the outbreak and how many survivors to walkers there likely are. Now, of course, I'm sure there are more walkers than the living, but there seems to be way more survivors and groups organized by them in the city and the area around it, compared to that of anywhere in America that we have seen other than the CRM, of course. The group eventually make it to a cemetery where Daryl notices a gravestone of an American rock star known as Jim Morrison, a part of the rock band The Doors. A nice little touch to the real world. Laurent tells Daryl that unlike Jim Morrison, he will not die in Paris and will make it back home. They are then stopped by yet another group of survivors, led by a character known as Falou, and his group are a part of the resistance in France. Isabelle repeats their motto, "Truth is Hope," so that he knows that they are allies of his. She then tells Falou about Father Jean and Laurent's journey here, and he immediately recognizes Laurent as quote-unquote the child. So obviously Laurent is a big symbol of hope even outside of the abbey and the nuns that were there. Falou then takes them to their settlement, which is on the rooftops, and they have 64 members here, and it's far from any walker's grasp. The place overlooks the city and has a great view of it and the Eiffel Tower. It also has its own gardens and much more. The Eiffel Tower is actually damaged, as you would assume it would be during an apocalypse, but we learn that a helicopter crashed into it in the very early days of the outbreak. Of course, Daryl is still on the lookout for a radio, so Falou takes him and Isabelle to Antoine, who runs the communication system here, but long story short, they don't actually use a radio here, they use pigeons. Now, clearly, pigeons are not going to work out and they will take way too long to return back in time, especially for Daryl, who needs to get back home to America. But something that Antoine said here actually interested me. He says that we all have someone waiting for us somewhere. Daryl looks down and thinks after he says this, as he's likely thinking about those at the Commonwealth, but also Rick Grimes, who he is still searching for, of course. We then see a huge group of people here surrounding Laurent and handing him gifts, almost like they worship him. Falou says that Father Jean was right about the child after he comforts a woman who has refused any support after her husband passed. So as of right now, it mainly seems like Laurent is more of that of a religious figure and symbol of hope rather than an actual cure. We finally get to see what Codron is up to again after the entire battle at the Abbey, as we see him making his way through a huge base that is absolutely packed with people. This is Madame Genet's place, and this is where some things get very big. Codron is here to meet with Genet and try to join her. As they sit down and speak with one another, he plays Daryl's audio recording that he found at the Abbey, and that explains all of his plans and even mentions the Commonwealth. He explains to Genet that Daryl killed his brother, so she can trust him, as he will not stop searching for the American who killed his brother, of course. So Madame Genet says that he is hired, so now Codron will have access to tons of men, weapons, and other resources. But it gets even more worrisome now. As they make their way through the hallway, they stop in a room where there is a scientist and a team observing a chained up walker. These guys are experimenting on the walkers and completely changing the game by weaponizing them. It seems that they may be responsible for creating some of these variant walkers, and we could honestly say enhanced walkers, as this one literally rips the metal chains out of the brick wall with brute strength and then sprints towards the glass and explodes. So not only do we have acid walkers and walkers that can climb, but now we will likely start seeing walkers that can sprint and ones with enhanced strength. So it's not looking too good for the survivors, that's for sure. Daryl, of course, still needs that radio, and Falou did tell him that he knows of a place where he can find people trading all types of things, but they will need some sort of currency or valuables. So Isabelle takes him to her old house, and they find pictures of her and Quinn together, and Daryl says that she upgraded with God, of course. Which is pretty funny, because I'm sure that she thought he was talking about him. They also find old pictures of her sister Lily, who is of course Laurent's mother. Isabelle opens up her old stash of valuables and money, all of which that she stole from people at nightclubs and such before she became a nun and before the apocalypse. Before heading out, her and Daryl talk for a bit, and Isabelle says that they're almost alike. Now, I definitely think that she's taking a liking to Daryl here. But anyways, as they make their way out, their initial exit is blocked off now by a group of walkers, so they have to go around and get out another way. However, when they get outside that way, they find a walker, and this is the girl that Isabelle left at the beginning of the outbreak. The minute that there is any noise made out here, it starts raining walkers. However, the thing is, these walkers aren't just falling and dying, they are falling and sort of regenerating and getting back up and then chasing after them again. One of them is also another acid walker. However, the two still manage to make it out of there without a scratch on them. They then meet with Falou, Laurent, and the rest of the group, and Isabelle actually gives Laurent the photo of his mother, Lily, so it doesn't seem like she is hiding anything about who his mother is. But there are definitely some other things being kept secret from him. Falou takes him to the place where they can trade for a radio, which happens to actually be a nightclub. Now, I don't know why, but this environment here and the sort of vibe here gave me a Fallout series vibe for some reason. Everyone else takes in the environment and the music playing here, while Daryl and Isabelle go and try to make an offer for a radio, all while somebody else on the balcony above watches over them all. The deal does not go very well and almost seemed as if it may be a setup, and they cause a commotion as a fight starts out, and it turns out the guy watching over them was Quinn. As he enters the scene, and it's clear that he is running things here at the nightclub. Laurent meets with the singer here known as Annabelle and shows her the picture of his mother, and she ends up giving him her necklace of the Eiffel Tower to remember his mother by. Laurent then walks over to the group and is introduced to Quinn as Lily's son, where he says that he has his mother's eyes. Isabelle then sends Laurent and the kids back up to the rooftops because things are starting to get a little sketchy here. Quinn takes Daryl and Isabelle back into his office to discuss business, and after Isabelle refuses a drink from Quinn as she has changed her ways and became a nun after they separated, out of nowhere, he sort of just gets mad and gets right in her face. As a huge plot twist comes in, saying that she should have told him that he had a son. So Laurent is Quinn and Lily's son, and he had gotten with Isabelle's sister without telling Isabelle until now, of course. And now to get a radio, they have to give him Laurent or tell him that his father is Quinn. Daryl does not take any sort of liking to Quinn, as why should he, and then he leaves with Isabelle, stopping any deal from happening, and Isabelle actually gets upset about this, telling him that she does not need a hero and never has. Now with them gone, Codron then shows up at the nightclub with his men, where Quinn says that he had a deal with Madame Genet, that being that his place is off limits. So it seems as if everyone so far knows of Madame Genet and her group. She clearly has all of the power over Paris, compared to that of any other group. Codron then tells Quinn that they are looking for an American that goes by Daryl Dixon. So I think that Quinn is likely to be joining the antagonist side, not going after Daryl, but to get Laurent, who he now knows is his son. Now back at the roof rooftop community, Isabelle walks over and tries to apologize to Daryl for her little outburst earlier, but he's keen on leaving now and is kind of over all of this. Before leaving, however, he tells Isabelle that she should stop lying to Laurent about everything, tell him who his father is, and tell him that he's just a regular child who got lucky. And unfortunately, Laurent overheard all of this and runs away as soon as Codron and his men storm the rooftops. Codron chases after Daryl, where they get into a pretty cool fight scene where Daryl emerges victorious after choking Codron out. But after all of that, and after running away from the barrage of gunfire, he stops and the roof he's standing on cracks and he falls in it. A bit cartoonish if you ask me, but this is where the episode ends off. And overall, I really enjoyed this episode, and the pacing of the show has been really good so far, but as for this episode alone, there wasn't too much action, but when there was, it was great. The ending was a bit cartoonish and out of nowhere, but it wasn't bad or anything, and I love the world building in this series and seeing how France is compared to everywhere else we have been in this franchise. All of these new characters are super interesting and their storytelling has been super good. And as far as the villains go and their plans, they are pretty terrifying. I'm super intrigued to see what other things they are doing to the walkers at Madame Genet's place, but I think I would rate this episode a 7 or 8 out of 10, and I'm super excited for the next one. But of course, I would like to hear about your thoughts on this episode as well, so make sure to leave them down below. Thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed our breakdown and review on this episode, don't forget to give it a like, and with that being said, we will see you all the next time that we go through and explore the nerdy multiverse.